everybody, this is Miss Rachel and Miss Heather from the Hagerstown Public Library, and we are back with our third week of our mythology class. So the past 2 weeks we talked about Greek mythology, and this week we're going to start talking about Egyptian mythology. Egyptian mythology is not as common as Greek, but it's still got some interesting facts and stories. So we just want to say, if you have not signed up for summer reading, please come in and sign up. You'll get we got all sorts of fun prizes and stuff. At the end of this program, I will give a code word, and you can use that, and you'll get credit for this program. So you need to sign up for summer reading, and you'll need to sign up before you can use the code word, because otherwise it'll be pointless. But we're gonna go ahead and get started.
Yep.
All right.
So this is ancient Egyptian mythology with Heather and Rachel.
Yeah. So Heather did some hieroglyphics last night, and so that's what it spells out. So thought those were pretty cool, and we also got a couple pyramids up there. But yes, you want to get started? Or you want me to?
I will start for you.
All right.
All right, like she said, I am Miss Heather, and this is kind of where my passion is, the Egyptian. I know quite a bit of Greek and Roman, but I geeked out with Egyptian when I was younger. So let's get started. We're going to talk about the gods, and then we'll kind of roll into, like we did with Greek, the creation story, and then do the facts of how they live life and just everyday things. Let's go. So the first one, the most important one, is the god Ra. The god of the sun. Ra was the first pharaoh of the world back in the days when gods inhabited Egypt. Each day, Ra's golden sun ship would sail across the sky, and each night it would travel through the underground world of Duat, sailing the river of darkness and fighting off monsters. Egyptians celebrated each sunrise when Ra emerged victorious again and caused a new day to begin. After many centuries, Ra became old and senile and retreated into the heavens, giving up his throne to Osiris. So that was Ra and Osiris are really major hitters in Egyptian religion and mythology, just given the fact that he's kind of like the creator of all things, and he was always victorious, making the next day come up so they could celebrate life further. The next one we have is Geb and Nut, the god of earth. Geb was of the first gods to appear from the sea of chaos at the beginning of time, and she'll explain that in the creation story. It'll make more sense. He appears as a man made of earth with rivers, forests, and hills across his entire body. Nut was Geb's wife, the goddess of the sky. Yes, we know she's got a funny name. It has nothing to do with peanuts, okay? So, she appeared as a woman with a skin like a starry sky, dark blue and covered in constellations. She is often pictured stretching over Geb as the prophecy that their children would try to overthrow him someday. So Ra did his best to keep them apart. So I skipped a line. So Ra and Geb were husband and wife, and they produced children, and Ra was convinced that one of their children would overthrow him, and that's eventually what happened. So Ra did his best to keep them apart. Despite this, she managed to have 5 kids, okay? And the oldest, Osiris, did indeed take over the throne from Ra. Next, we have Shu. Nut's father, the god of the air, was given the job between keeping Nut and Geb apart. This is why the sky is so far above the earth. The god of the wind stays between them, keeping his daughter from visiting her love, the earth. Shu is usually not pictured because he's invisible like the wind. So I'll show you pictures. I'm still trying to get used to this. So this is Ra. This is Geb and Nut, and you can see the kind of starry sky looking, and then you have Nut right here. And then you've got Shu. So this one is not really pictured. So to find a picture of Shu is really rare. I'm going to hand it over to Miss Rachel.
All right, so we'll go to the next page. Okay, so first we've got Osiris, the first son of Geb and Nut. Osiris was a wise and good pharaoh when he took over the world from Ra. Osiris taught man about farming and created the first cities of Egypt. Unfortunately, Osiris's brother Set was jealous of him. Set tricked him into laying down in a golden coffin, then sealed the coffin and cut it into pieces. Set scattered the pieces all over Egypt, and Osiris's wife, Isis, spent many years searching for them. Eventually, Isis put her husband back together, binding him in cloth to make the first mummy. But Osiris only came partially back to life. After that, he was the god of the underworld, sitting in judgment over the souls of the dead. He appears as a king with blue skin and white robes. And then next we have Isis. Osiris's wife was the goddess of magic and clever and ambitious women. She tricked Ra into retiring by poisoning him with a magic snake, then encouraging the old sun god to reveal his secret name so Isis could cure him. Once Isis knew Ra's secret name, she could force him to do just about anything. She encouraged him to retreat into the sky, opening the throne for Osiris. Isis was the patron of magicians and loved her husband very much. She encouraged their son Horus to take vengeance on the evil Set who had killed Osiris. Isis is often pictured as a beautiful woman with multicolored wings. And then next we have Set, the god of desert, storms, and evil. Set was one mean dude. His color was red, the color of sterile soil and the desert. Set was the strongest of the gods and very tricky. He became pharaoh of Egypt after killing his brother, but was later overthrown by his nephew Horus. After that, Set fled into the desert where he controlled all the evil, harsh lands outside the Nile Valley. Set wasn't all bad, however. In the old days, he sailed on Ra's boat and helped defend the sun god from the armies of the chaos serpent Apep. Set is usually pictured with red skin and the head of an unknown animal demon, part dog, part anteater, all ugly. So up here at the top, you can see Osiris. He's got the blue skin, although in this picture it kind of looks greenish. And then we've got Isis, his wife. She's got the multicolored wings. And then here's Set with the weird head.
Yep. All right, next page we have Nephthys Horse and Bast. Bast reminds me of Blueberry, because it's a cat. So Nephthys, the river goddess, wife of Set and the sister of Isis. Nephthys didn't like her husband very much because after that he killed Osiris. Nephthys helped Isis collect his pieces and bind them together. She was a kind and gentle goddess and mother of Anubis, the god of funeral rites. Next we have Horus, called the Avenger. Horus was the son of Isis and Osiris. When he grew to manhood, he challenged Set and eventually defeated him, becoming the new pharaoh of Egypt. Afterwards, all mortal pharaohs considered themselves to be descendants of Horus. Horus's symbol was the falcon. He is often pictured as a man with a falcon's head. Next, we got Bast. Cats, very extremely popular in Egypt because they could kill snakes, scorpions, and other nasty creatures, which was important in the desert because there were a lot of things in the desert that could kill you. So cats are very, very valuable and important and worshipped. Bast, the goddess of cats, was just as popular. Bast was a protective goddess, and people would wear amulets with her likeness for good luck. So an amulet is like something that has like a cat on it. Like I like turtles, so I wear a turtle. So it'd be like me wearing a cat head, like on a necklace or something. Kind of respect. With her likeness for good luck, especially during bad luck demon days at the end of each year. In cat form, Bast is often pictured with a knife, fighting the chaos serpent Apep. She was Ra's faithful cat. So here is Nephthys. Okay. Oh, sorry. Still getting used to it. Nephthys. And then we've got Horus. And then we've got Bast. So a lot of these pictures are what are featured in the hieroglyphs when you look inside the pyramids and the chambers of the burial. And I'll show you something really quick that has their likeness. So this is some of the gods that I saw in a museum. So these are a lot of the likeness. So the pictures we're showing of the gods is what they would put in hieroglyphics and paintings on the pyramid walls and the chamber walls. Okay?
Okay, so the next page, if I can get it, there we go. All right, so the first one is Sobek. The god of crocodiles was both respected and feared. Crocodiles were strong creatures. In ancient Egypt, an entire city was named after them, Crocodipolis.
You're good.
And Sobek had a temple with a lake full of crocodiles. However, crocodiles were fearsome predators, and many Egyptians were killed each year if they got too near the river. Sobek was pictured as a crocodile-headed man. His sweat was said to have created the rivers of the world. Gross. Next we got Sirket. The goddess of scorpions was both good and bad. She could send scorpions after her enemies, and a single scorpion bite could kill you. On the other hand, you could pray to Sirket for protection from poison, and sometimes she was seen as a guardian of children. She was pictured as a woman with a giant scorpion for a crown. How'd you like that on your head? And then the third one is Anubis. Anubis was the god of funerals. He was one of the most important gods because he helped prepare the soul for the afterlife and escorted the dead to the Hall of Judgment. The Egyptians noticed jackals hanging around their graveyards, so they decided jackals must be Anubis's sacred animal. Priests even wore jackal masks when they made the pharaoh's bodies into a mummy. Anubis helped Isis make Osiris into the first mummy. Anubis is usually pictured as a man with a jackal's head leading a departed spirit through the Duat. Okay, so first, and it's not a very good picture, so sorry, but we've got Sobek up here. And then we've got, Sirket, and then Anubis down here with the jackal head.
Okay. So we will learn about Anubis here in a few minutes because, like they said, he's a very important god, and it came with burial rites, and the Egyptians were very particular about their burial rites and very religious and had set things they would do for burials, especially the upper class Egyptians.
Yeah. Afterlife was a big deal to the Egyptians, so you'll hear a lot about that, how they did the mummies and all the different tombs and all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So next we have Bes. Bes is the god of dwarves, protector of households, mothers, and children. One of the ugliest and most popular gods in ancient Egypt. Bes had the power to scare off evil spirits. He often appeared on amulets, so like I said, like a symbol or like a necklace or something you could carry with you. Something smaller, not so cumbersome. He appeared on amulets and sculptures as a hairy little man with a lion-like mane and a pug nose. Egyptians believed that dwarves and other people who were born different were inherently magical. Bes was considered extremely good luck. He watched over the common man, children, women in childbirth, and anyone who else needed protection from evil. It's kind of like a do-it-all god. Khonsu, the god of the moon, loved to gamble. In fact, he once lost 5 days of moonlight to the sky goddess Nut in a game of Senet, which allowed Nut to give birth to her 5 children. Sometimes Khonsu is depicted as a hawk-headed god, but more often looks like a young man with a side lock of hair, like the Egyptian used. His favorite color is silver. Next, we have Nekhbet. Nekhbet is the goddess of vultures. One of the oldest goddesses of Egypt, Nekhbet was a patron of the pharaoh and is often pictured with her wings spread over the king. Her shrine was in Nekheb, the city of the dead, where she oversaw the oldest oracle in Egypt. Like all vultures, she preyed on the dead and the dying. If you see Nekhbet hovering over you, you better start dancing. Let her know you're alive. Don't be still. Just dance, okay? So, Bes is our hairy little dwarf, but he's a very, very, very important god. Next we have Khonsu. So that's what he looks like. These are what were carved into the walls of the tombs and other things. And then now we have Nekhbet. So she's the one you have to dance for so she doesn't think you're dead.
All right, looks like we got 2 more here. Okay, so first we have Babi. Unlike the wise baboons of Thoth, Babi was the god of wild baboons, especially alpha males. He was aggressive and bloodthirsty and was given the job of eating the wicked dead of the underworld. He especially loved entrails. Yum. Babi is definitely not a primate you'd want to fight. Yeah, I don't think I'd want to meet him. And then the last one is Taweret. Taweret was the goddess of hippos. While the Egyptians were scared of male hippos, they saw the female hippo goddess Taweret as a gentle protector. She looked after pregnant women especially and is often depicted with a swollen belly. Like Bes, she could scare off evil spirits. In fact, in many stories, Taweret is the girlfriend of Bes. What a cute couple. So first up here, and once again, it's not a very good picture, but you can kind of see it's Bobby's.
He's a baboon.
Yeah, basically a baboon that can walk. You can see he's got legs down here. And then here is Taweret, and you can see she's got a swollen belly like she's pregnant or something. Okay, so those are like the main Egyptian gods and goddesses. And as with anything, like we talked about with the Greek mythology, every thing you read, like some things are just slightly different. So if you get into Egyptian mythology, look into it or something, some stories or accounts are just a little bit different in, I mean, it's mythology, so there's no real like set record of
No.
anything. So people just kind of made it up as they went, and
it also was kind of based on wherever you were kingdom wise and
Yeah.
what had spread, because mythology is something people have created basically, and it depends on the Silk Road and how it traveled through the region. So it varies, just like Greek and Roman, they borrowed things from each other and how things traveled.
yeah. So it'd be like, for example, say in America, we believed in Egyptian mythology. Well, people in California may have a little bit different story of people like in New York.
Yep.
So they just like overall it was pretty similar, but there were some differences. So that's just why you'll see different stories, different versions. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to read the creation story. And yeah, there's several different versions of this one. Yeah, it took us a while to find this one. But you want to read it or you want me to?
I read.
All right.
So with this one, the reason why we do the gods first and then the creation, because there's a lot of like what we call name dropping of the major gods in this. So you got to hear bits and pieces of the creation story when it comes to like Isis and Ra and a couple other ones. So when you hear those names in the creation story, you'll know what the background is of them and their story. Okay, let's start. So the creation story, a northwestern quarter of suburban Cairo. So Cairo is like the epicenter and the capital of Egypt. So that's where a lot of the pharaohs and the Nile and all that stuff, that was the big place.
It's the popular spot.
Exactly. So covered by 20 meters of earth. Development and the lost echoes of history. An ancient city that witnessed the creation of the universe. The city later called Paulus City of the sun god. So Ra was the sun god, okay? By the Greeks, and later Anshams, the sun, by the Arabs, is probably one of the oldest religious sites in the world. While its unexcavated remains lie under centuries of fields and settlements, the place remains a symbolic monument to Ra, the greatest god in ancient Egypt. The origin of the story, how Ra spawned, is all that is known, is both fascinating and illuminating. It's kind of a very big interest in the start of everything. Before creation, according to Egyptian mythology, only darkness embraced the primeval ocean of what life would come. When the breath of life was strong and ready, then entity called Atum, decided it was time for creation to begin. An island emerged from the water to support its divinity, who manifested itself from the form of Ra. So manifestation means like it was created from the form of Ra. He had a big part of it, the sun god of Egypt. On a primeval hill, Ra created out himself the first gods, Shu, dryness and air. So he was the one between Nut and Geb to keep them apart. So we need air was the biggest part of it. And his partner Tefnut, humidity, who would engender the other gods to complete the cosmos. Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess, and return. In turn, these two birthed the principles of life, namely Osiris and the perfect being, who eventually would rule over the rest of the world, which Ra was busy creating by naming the elements. And by the way, humankind happened out of the tears of his eyes. So you'll see on hieroglyphics and different wall writings, you'll see like the eye, and the tears were created with the humans. Okay, so Osiris was a kind and wise ruler who taught humans agriculture and civilization, with a sister/wife, Isis, who helped her husband with creativity and magic. They formed the perfect couple. Their brother Seth was strong but unruly, the opposite of his brother. In fact, Seth envied Osiris so much that he killed him to inherit the throne and rule Egypt the way he wanted. So Seth is another name for another god. I haven't quite seen yet, but I'm gathering information as we go.
Yeah. Set, they do that sometimes. They'll spell them just a little bit different, like Set versus Seth. I mean, they're the same, just a little different.
It's kind of like the variation, if we had Egyptian mythology here in the U.S., like she said, it could be different from California to New York. It's kind of that variance. Seth's sister partner Nephthys could not stop the murder of her love for their siblings. Killing Osiris turned out not such a bad idea. He was resurrected through the magic of his wife long enough to have a son, Horus, who would later avenge his father and recapture the throne of Egypt. Then Osiris departed from the other world to rule the deceased. So that was the underworld. It was really important. Thus ensuring resurrection in the cycle of life. They celebrated the underworld and life very heavily and was very important in their everyday culture. Yet the myths do not end here. While the aging Ra was fine-tuning his creations, humanity rebelled against him. The god decided on extermination, asking his tear-giving eye again for help. To fulfill her task, the eye transformed herself into a fierce lioness and began slaughtering humanity. Delighted in her feeding, when saw the carnage, he felt sorry for the beloved children, who, like tears, came out of his eyes. He stopped the massacre but refused to live more among humans. This led to his journey to the otherworld, where Ra created 12 hours of day by sailing the sky from the eastern horizon to the west, illuminating and allowing all creations to flourish under his rays. Reaching the western horizon, Ra then left the earth in darkness for 12 hours a night, while he sailed the underworld, illuminating the dead, destroying the enemies of creation, and regenerating himself in a union with Osiris, the god of resurrection. When Ra appeared at dawn in the eastern horizon, he took form of a falcon, known as Horus, or Horus in the horizon. So that's where we get different names and different variations of mythology for Egyptian. He took the form of a falcon, or Horus. The falcon who flies high in the sky, Horus, one who's high, translates literally into one who's high up. But Ra had other forms. He could also be represented as a scarab called the Kaheb, one who comes into being. So a scarab is kind of like a modern day beetle, except for it was like this big.
Yeah, it was big.
He was a big guy. Okay. First, he also became a scarab who rises from the desert sands at the first rays of sun. Pushing a ball of dung carrying his eggs was believed to be self-created. By midday, the sun god, again Ra, represented by the sun to dusk. At sunset, he became Atum, an old man who had completed his life cycle and was ready to disappear to be regenerated the new day. Given this story, the sun god Ra has always been the greatest god in Egypt. In the Old Kingdom, 2800 BCE, when Egypt established its institution, expressed its royal ideology, the divinized king of Egypt was considered the son of Ra, the sun god. During a coronation, the king's name was son of Ra, was described as a cartouche next to one naming him as king of the Upper and Lower Egypt. So cartouches are like our version of a nameplate or something like that, where you are renamed and you get like your royal name and god name in a way. Kings erected temples for him, endowing these temples with lands and clergy to serve his cult, and they added sun god chapels to their own memorial temples throughout the century. By the New Kingdom, circa 1500 to 1000 BCE, the cult of Amun, the political god of the empire, tried to overshadow Ra's importance, but the kings of the 18th dynasty reacted strongly. The decorations of their tombs in the Valley of the Kings in the western Thebes support the supremacy of the sun god Ra, and whom kings emerged after death to partake in eternal life. In the brief monotheistic episode of Akhenaton, the king denied any god but the sun god himself and wrote hymns to the god so marvelous they were later echoed in biblical psalms of King of David. Even though the reign of Akhenaton, most of Egypt's great gods synthesized with Ra as Amun-Ra, Akmun-Ra, or Sobek Ra, and so forth, it would take yet more centuries and Roman conquest before the cult of Ra declined. And yet, even today in modern Egypt, entranced by its ancient civilization, the tale endures. Reflections of Ra are still heard in folklore as his fiery eye is evoked in popular songs and local expressions. The word Ra also appears in everything from Hollywood films to video games. Clearly, the resurrection is a great ancient god, continues as predictably as the sun rising in the east. So, with the story of creation, the kings and the pharaohs and the Pharisees could kind of alter what they worshiped, what their kingdom worshiped, and what they believed in based on their personal beliefs. If they didn't like something, they go, I don't like it, I'm gonna nix it. And then the next pharaoh that comes up may be like, I like this one, we're gonna worship this again. And it just kind of went back and forth between the different dynasties of Egyptian pharaohs.
Yep, you'll notice a lot of times they believe that the pharaohs were like descended from the gods. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so now I'm going to read the story of Osiris and Isis. You remember Osiris was cut up into lots of pieces by his brother Set. So we'll read that story and
go from there. We have
Yeah.
a little bit more time. I will mention that it kind of, today's culture, everybody's like all about zombies and the underworld and bringing back the dead. You know, Osiris kind of is that first original zombie underworld kind of thing, if you think about it in more of a kid form, you know.
Yep. All right, so here we go. A long time ago, the god Osiris came to Egypt to rule as king. He brought the Egyptian people new laws and taught them how to farm well and live peacefully in their villages. Osiris was a very wise and powerful king and was loved and respected by the Egyptian people. However, his brother Set was very jealous of his brother's power in Egypt and began to form a plan to kill Osiris and take over his throne. Late one night, Set tiptoed into Osiris's bedroom. Careful not to wake up Osiris or his queen, the goddess Isis, Seth measured Osiris's body from top to bottom and from side to side. The next morning, Set took the measurement to a carpenter who made a beautiful wooden chest decorated with bright paint and sheets of gold. Can you imagine having sheets of gold put on a box?
That's expensive.
Yeah. That night, Set threw a huge party and invited Osiris as the guest of honor. The night was spent feasting, singing, dancing, and playing games. For the final game, Set brought out the huge wooden chest. He announced that the first person to fit perfectly into the chest would be allowed to keep it. One by one, each of Set's friends climbed into the chest. Unsurprisingly, no one was able to fit into the chest, which was made perfectly for Osiris. Finally, Set and his friends convinced Osiris to try his luck with the chest. Osiris stepped into the chest and lay down. The chest fit him perfectly, just as Set had planned. Just as Osiris lay down, Set slammed the lid and sealed it shut. Set and his friends took the chest down to the Nile River and dumped it in, knowing that Osiris would never be able to survive. I personally feel like that's a very dirty trick and also would be terrifying.
No, that's like
Yeah. When Isis heard the news of her husband's death, she was extremely upset. Reasonably so. She rushed to the riverbank and after several days of searching found the wooden chest. Isis opened it and removed the dead body of her beloved Osiris. Crying, Isis hid Osiris's body in the river grass. She didn't want Set to find Osiris's corpse before she could perform the proper rituals that would allow him to pass into the afterlife. And once again, it mentions like how much they believed in the afterlife. Like, if you didn't get the proper rituals, you were like, it was not good.
you were doomed.
Yeah, so it was very important to them that they did all this stuff. Okay, late that night, Set returned to the Nile to make sure Osiris's body had washed away. The chest was nowhere to be found, but after searching the riverbank grass, he found the body of his late brother. Furious, Set cut Osiris's body into 14 pieces. To make sure that the body was never found again, he hurled the pieces all over Egypt. The next morning, Isis returned to the river with her sister Nephthys and her friends to perform the necessary rituals, only to find Osiris's body gone. Isis transformed into a huge bird and flew high over Egypt. Using her sharp vision, she was able to find all the pieces of the body to put Osiris back together. With the help of Nephthys, Thoth, and Anubis, Isis performed a great act of magic. Very carefully, they began to sew Osiris's body back together. They worked together night after night. When the body was whole once again, they wrapped it head to toe in strips of linen, creating a mummy. On the night of the full moon, Isis used powerful magic to bring her husband back to life. Osiris embraced Isis and thanked her sister and her friends. He told them he would not be able to stay in the world of the living. He explained that, having died, he needed to travel to the world of the dead where he would become the king of the afterlife. When he left, Osiris told Isis not to worry. He told her that she would soon give birth to a son, Horus, who would defeat Set and become great protector of the Egyptian people. By taking back the throne from Set, Horus would restore peace and order to the universe. When Horus was born, he was hidden away and kept safe from his evil uncle Set. When he became of age, Horus finally confronted Set and they violently fought. During the fight, Horus's left eye was poked out but magically came to life. Later on, the Wajet, or Eye of Horus, became a powerful symbol to promote healing. Although Horus emerged victorious, there was still a question of who legally had power to the throne. Set believed that as Osiris' brother, he was the rightful ruler, but Horus argued that he should be proclaimed king since he was Osiris' legitimate heir. Unfortunately, ultimately, it was decided that Horus would rule on Earth as king, and Set was banished forever. So, like, once again, it mentioned the eye. Eyes were very popular in Egypt. Like, we mentioned the cat earlier. They believed that the tears of one of the gods, I can't remember which one, but the tears basically created the people. So each tear was a person or something. Yep. So, yeah.
So one of the variants, like we've talked about kind of since we've started this video, is the varying stories of creation and different stories of the gods and how they fought and how they differed. This story of Osiris and Isis said that Osiris was chopped into 14 pieces. Another story I've ran into in the last few weeks and remember as a kid was he was chopped into like 42 different pieces just strewn about the kingdoms. That was just another varying tale and different variation for it. One of the things, a lot of the things like Miss Rachel and I kind of repeated through this whole thing is the afterlife. And since Osiris was like the first documented mummy, I'm going to tell you about the mummies and the religion and how popular and how needed it was for that time and how much in demand. And I will say this, there are different types of burial rites, there are different types of affordability, kind of like with funerals today. It just depends on how much you had. Obviously, if you were Pharisees, high class, the richer tier, you could afford your own chamber in a pyramid. You could afford all these things, different parts of the ritual that I'm going to explain to you. If you were more on the middle to poor class, if you were able to, you could scrape up money and do a different type of form of mummy. Just a lot of the things that they did for the richer were eliminated, but you were still able to afford. If you weren't, then you were buried, like we had talked about in the first story, in the desert and just kind of left. That doesn't mean that you weren't able to go to the underworld, but it was just a lesser, I guess, funeral rites than we would have today. So you have like the really expensive stuff, or you could, go into different tiers of the religious rulers. So I'm going to read you some things about the mummies. So to understand the Egyptian mummies, you have to first know about the religious beliefs that we've been discussing. Ancient Egyptians believed in many gods, and that was the person they died, they passed into the afterlife. The afterlife, another word is the underworld, or the reeds, like they were talking about. They found Osiris in the grasses and the reeds, and that's another word for the underworld because it was like a paradise to some, depending on what you did and how your heart weighed, and we'll discuss that story as well. In order to have that kind of life, their body needed to be preserved. They needed to be buried with all their possessions, and the afterlife that would be taken with them on the journey. So to them, the afterlife was like another part of your life, but you had to take a lot of your possessions to live that and get through there. So like they would take jewelry, money, clothing, just the basic thing you need to live your life. So if you want to put it in your perspective, you could take your toys, your money, your pet if they passed away with you. You could take that kind of stuff with you, and they would put them in the burial chambers with you.
Sometimes they'd even like put their wives or children in there with them. So they'd like kill the wives or children and put them in there. Usually that was more like if you were like a pharaoh or something, but still, that'd be pretty terrifying.
It'd be terrifying. And then, Egyptians lived a very somewhat healthy life, so they lived a long time. So they would start actually doing the burial tombs at a younger age, unless something happened to them. They would actually build in with purpose different chambers for different people in their lives and already have that done. So they didn't always have to kill the person, but they would have somewhere to go, like a mausoleum for modern day terms. Okay, so there were various steps to mummification. The body must be purified and washed. So they had to wash the body, get rid of all the gunk, just wash it and clean it. All internal organs were removed. However, they left the heart in place. That is a very, very important part of this. mummification process. They had to fill the body with like some kind of stuffing. It would either do like linens if you're more in the higher tier of being rich or a pharaoh or whatever. If you had money, it just depends on where you lay and wanted the process. They would even do like wood chips is the best way to explain it. They would fill you with that if you didn't have as much money or nothing at all. But they had to dry you out to do the mummification process. So the stuffing was made out of sawdust or linen, like I said. The body was then carefully wrapped in layers of linen that covered the area of body, and some were special. Oils were placed on the body that helped the preservation, and final covering place was called a shroud. So the oils were there kind of like to dehydrate any fluids and liquids with the body, and the more money you had, the better process was going to be. There are mummies that have been found with still hair intact, with still scars. They did tattoos back then, so tattoos have been around for thousands of years. Still skin intact, everything intact because of the process that they would do.
It's pretty amazing when you think about that.
Yeah, it's insane. Like, they would even mummify your cats.
Yeah.
Because, like they said, the Set is very celebrated and a very big god to them, and they love their cats.
Very much.
Very much so. The finished mummy was placed in a stone or wooden container called a sarcophagus. So when you see, like, the famous King Tut, they are... Like I said, it depends on how much money you want to spend. You could just be in like just a regular plaster tomb, or there would be sarcophagus is the technical name, or a coffin. It could be made out of plaster with all these unique decorations and painted. When you see King Tut's, it is like layered with gold, different colors, different paints. Very accurate and meticulously done. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about the body and the process. The organs of the body had been taken out and were also mummified and placed in special containers. So these are really important. They would be placed in a burial tomb with the body. Both the sarcophagus and the jars containing the parts were sealed in a black resin. So it's kind of like a modern day glue. And with that kind of glue, it actually is what really held the bodies together. It held the organs together, and that's how we get such preserved bodies and mummies and the organs and the preservation facts. They left the heart in the body as they thought this was a required part for the test needed in the afterlife, which I'll tell you in a minute. I'm excited. They believed that the heart was the center of all intelligence and emotion, but they removed the brain thinking that wasn't as important. So I'll just put it this way, the brain would come out of the nose, and that's all I'm explaining because I don't want to give you guys nightmares. So these are the jars they would put them in the afterlife. So if you can see it, so we've got Anubis is definitely the big guy. He was the jackal. We have Babi, the baboon. So he was kind of a protector. We have, let's see, the human was what your liver was put into. And these were actually what they put your stuff in, and they would mummify those, and those would go with you in the afterlife, so you can be complete and whole. So there's that. So the pharaohs had the most expensive mummification of all people. Like I said, there were different tiers of different things you could do for your family member's body. Since the pharaoh was considered a god, they included many gems and amulets in between the layers of linen wrapping. They would also use special sarcophagus for the pharaoh that was carved and painted with his likeness. So, like, when you see King Tut's, like, the famous one, you see King Tut and Nefertiti and a couple other ones. They were very much inlaid, very detailed, and had everything they needed, and very taken care of, and very specialized and custom, basically. You could do whatever you wanted if you had that kind of money. Some were decorated with gold. Others had solid gold decorative masks placed on the head and the face that looked like the pharaoh. So, King Tut, prime example. I will look it up and I will post that later on here. Pretty cool. The pharaoh mummies were placed in special burial places along with many of the expensive items that would need in their afterlife. So, let's see. There were special religious burial rites that had to be performed by the temple priests at each step of the mummification. This was due to help make sure the person who passed away, would go into the afterlife and entirely, properly. They were special oils that were used to purify by the priest. They were also developed over the years to help preserve the body. So it was that black tar kind of chemical I was telling you about. That was made by the priest, and that was very important as well. Mummies have been discovered that are over 3,000 years old. So like older than Moses almost. When they were found, they were almost perfectly preserved, and you could tell, like I said, they had the tattoos, they had scars, the skin was almost perfectly intact. Obviously, it's dried and dehydrated, but it was a good example of what you get is what you pay for, is a good quote for it. So, facts about Egyptian mummy. Egyptians believed that mummification was necessary to gain access to the afterlife. Mummification was really expensive. Animals such as bulls, I forgot, bulls were very sacred and huge. So imagine like a cow passing away and you doing this process with the cows.
Yeah.
That is a lot of linen, and modern day, think about a lot of toilet paper wrapping. If you do your Halloween mummies, that's a lot to go through. Cats and falcons were also mummified. The ancient Egyptians kept some of the body parts, lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines in canopic jars. So that's what I was showing you earlier. That's what was in those jars. And they had the major gods that they celebrated and as the heads of those jars, and a human as well. It took about 70 days to complete the embalming of a body. That also, what I've read is 50 to 70 days based on basically how much you made and what the process you wanted done. With the pharaohs and the royals, it did take up to 70 days because they wanted all the extra. They wanted the jewels. They wanted the gold inlays. They wanted to look like gods when they died, basically. So you get what you pay for. The mummy was placed then in a stone coffin called the sarcophagus. Let's see. Yeah, that's how they would do mummification when you passed away. So there is that.
Okay, so I found a story I thought was interesting. It's basically the Egyptian version of Cinderella.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read that, and if we have more time, we've got some other info on like pyramids and a little bit more info on mummies. But we will see what kind of time we have left when we're done with this. It's called The Girl with the Rose-Red Slippers. In the last days of ancient Egypt, not many years before the country was conquered by the Persians, she was ruled by a pharaoh called Amasis. So as to strengthen his country against the threat of invasion by Cyrus of Persia, who was conquering all the known world, he welcomed as many Greeks as wished to trade with or settle in Egypt, and gave them a city called Naucratis to be entirely their own. In Naucratis, not far from the mouth of the Nile that flows into the Sea of Canopus, there lived a wealthy Greek merchant named Charaxus. His true home was in the island of Lesbos, but the famous poetess Sappho was his sister. But he had spent most of his life trading with Egypt, and in his old age he settled at Naucratis. One day, when he was walking in the marketplace, he saw a great crowd gathered round the place where the slaves were sold. Out of curiosity, he pushed his way into their midst and found that everyone was looking at a beautiful girl who had just been set up on the stone rostrum to be sold. She was obviously a Greek with white skin and cheeks like blushing roses, and Charaxus caught his breath, for he had never seen anyone quite so lovely. Consequently, when the bidding began, Charaxus was determined to buy her, and being one of the wealthiest merchants in all of Naucratis, he did so without much difficulty. When he had bought the girl, he discovered that her name was Rhodopis, and that she had been carried away by pirates from her home in the north of Greece when she was a child. They had sold her to a rich man who employed many slaves on the island of Samos, and she had grown up there, one of her fellow slaves being an ugly little man called Aesop, who was always kind to her and told her the most entrancing stories and fables about animals and birds and human beings. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Aesop's fables, but they're short little stories, like usually just a couple minutes long, and they've always got like a good moral to the story or stuff. Mm-hmm. But you should look them up if you've never heard of them.
They're pretty good.
Mm-hmm. But when she was grown up, her master wished to make some money out of so beautiful a girl, and had sent her to rich Naucratis to be sold. Charaxus listened to her tale and pitied her deeply. Indeed, very soon he became quite besotted with her. He gave her a lovely house to live in, with a garden in the middle of it, and slave girls to attend on her. He heaped her with presents of jewels and beautiful clothes and spoiled her as if she had been his own daughter. One day, a strange thing happened as Rhodopis was bathing in the marble-edged pool in her secret garden. The slave girls were holding her clothes and guarding her jeweled girdle and her rose-red slippers, of which she was particularly proud, while she lazed in the cool water, for a summer's day, even in the north of Egypt, grows very hot about noon. Suddenly, when all seemed quiet and peaceful, an eagle came swooping down out of the clear blue sky, down straight as if to attack the little group by the pool. The slave girls dropped everything they were holding and fled shrieking to hide among the trees and flowers of the garden. And Rhodopis rose from the water and stood with her back against the marble fountain at one end of it, gazing with wide, startled eyes. But the eagle paid no attention to any of them. Instead, it swooped right down and picked up one of her rose-red slippers in its talons. Then it soared up into the air again on its great wings, and still carrying the slipper, flew away to the south over the valley of the Nile. Rhodopis wept at the loss of her rose-red slipper, feeling sure that she would never see it again, and sorry also to have lost anything that Charaxus had given her. But the eagle seemed to have been sent by the gods, perhaps by Horus himself, whose sacred bird he was. For he flew straight up to the Nile, to Memphis, and then swooped down towards the palace. At that arrow, Pharaoh Amasis sat in the great courtyard, doing justice to his people and hearing any complaints that they wished to bring. Down over the courtyard swooped the eagle and dropped the rose-red slipper of Rhodopis into Pharaoh's lap. The people cried out in surprise when they saw this, and Amasis too was much taken aback. But, as he took upon the little rose-red slipper and admired the delicate workmanship and the tiny of it, he felt that the girl for whose foot it was made must indeed be one of the loveliest in the world. Indeed, Amasis the Pharaoh was so moved by what had happened that he issued a decree. Let my messengers go forth upon the cities of the Delta, and if need be, into Upper Egypt to the very borders of my kingdom. Let them take with them this rose-red slipper which the divine bird of Horus has brought to me, and let them declare that her from whose foot the slipper came shall be the bride of Pharaoh. Then the messengers prostrated themselves, crying, Life, health, and strength be to Pharaoh. Pharaoh has spoken, and his command shall be obeyed. So they set forth from Memphis and went by way of Heliopolis and Tanis and Canopus until they came to Necrotis. Here they heard of the rich merchant Charaxus, and how he had bought the beautiful Greek girl in the slave market, and how he lavished all his wealth upon her as if she had been a princess, put in his care by the gods. So they went to the great house beside the Nile and found Rhodopis in the quiet garden beside the pool. When they showed her the rose-red slipper, she cried out in surprise that it was hers. She held out her foot so that they could see how well it fitted her, and she bade one of the slave girls to fetch the pair to it, which she kept carefully in memory of her strange adventure with the eagle. Then the messengers knew that this was the girl whom Pharaoh had sent them to find, and they knelt before her and said, The good god Pharaoh Amasis, life, health, strength be to him, bids you come with all speed to his palace at Memphis. There you shall be treated with all honor and given a high place in his royal house of women. For he believes that Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris, sent that eagle to bring the rose-red slipper and cause him to search for you. Such a command could not be disobeyed. Rhodopis bade farewell to Charaxus, who was torn between joy at her good fortune and sorrow at his loss, and set out for Memphis. When Amasis saw her beauty, he was sure that the gods had sent her to him. He did not merely take her into his royal house of women, he made her his queen and the royal lady of Egypt. And they lived happily together for the rest of their lives, and died a year before the coming of Anubis the Persian. So as you can see, that's very similar to the story of Cinderella, although it is a little different. But I find it interesting that different countries had different versions of the same story. Like, the original Cinderella was, what was she, like English or?
It's English.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, over there in Europe somewhere. But yeah. And then there's this Egyptian version, and there was another version I saw from somewhere, but I don't remember where I saw it. But yeah, I just find that really fascinating. So it looks like we've got a couple more minutes left. So,
I found some King Tut stuff.
okay.
So, in the late 1800s to like the 1900s, Egyptology in Britain was very big. At the time, there was a really big English presence in Africa because Africa still, or England, owned quite a bit of Africa still in that time. So therefore, they had to listen to the Queen, and exploring was a big part of that and the reign. So I was telling you about King Tut and like how money matters when it comes to your burial rights, how you were buried, what you were buried with, and how eccentric things could be. So in 1922, Howard Carter was the one that discovered King Tut in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. So this is what they found when they opened things up. So this is what King Tut looked like. Thank you. That was his burial mask, kind of a likeness of him. So you could see how eccentric it was and how much color was there. Sorry. And then this is what he looked like. So he was buried with the things he had in life. So the second coffin was made of gold foil laid over wood like each of the other coffins. It reproduces the features of the young pharaoh. So this is the likeness of what King Tutankhamun looked like. So that's a little bit more of a visual. So you don't have to I don't have to look it up for you, and you can see it yourself. He had several chambers in his burial grounds, I guess you could call it, in the pyramids. He had an annex, he had an antechamber, a burial chamber, and then he had a whole room just for treasures for the afterlife. So like he had everything and more that you could think of. So here is, sorry, Miss Rachel.
No, you're good.
Another picture of what his tomb looked like and how it broke down in the pyramid. So like you've got the treasure room here, the burial. Let's see. He had treasure room, burial chamber, and then you had the chamber to get into that part. And there was different trapdoors and different areas you had to get where he was and untomb him.
Yeah, they believed that the afterlife was basically like a second life, so they would need like all their pets. They would often bury food with them, like the jewels and stuff. So like they would need money, they would need food, they would need their pets, like that kind of thing. So that's why they did that.
Yeah. So there was a lot of things, like she said, even they had mentioned like you could bury your prize bull with you.
That would be really weird.
Like you could just go in the afterlife and have your bull be like, hey guys, I'm just walking my bull. It's fine. We're cool. So during that time when they found King Tut, and Tutankhamun was his full name, they found that he was 16 when he died, but he ruled like for quite a few years during that time when he was a pharaoh ruler, which is not unusual to be young and rule. You could be like 10 if obviously you would have somebody that ruled under you and that would help you and advise you, but that'd be crazy to be like 16 and be the ruler of a whole kingdom and have that much money, that much power. And he was married to his stepsister at the time. So it was kind of interesting. I can post some more facts about King Tut, but he's the one that kind of kicked off exploration and the interest in Egyptian culture, mythology, and exploration in the King of the Valley of the Kings in Cairo, Egypt. It's a really big place you can visit, very historical. It's a really neat place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you guys are ever interested in learning more about Egyptology and stuff, we have this really cool book here at the library. It's got all sorts of fun pictures and like some lift the flap, all sorts of fun facts and info. So if you're ever interested, just come into the library. The book is titled Egyptology, or I don't know, we could probably find it even if you don't remember what the title is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really cool. All sorts of fun information and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
All right. Anything else we want to add to the end here?
No, just that. Oh, we forgot a special word.
Oh, yes. You probably want the code word, don't you?
That's a good thing to have.
Okay, so the code word for today is Ra. It's spelled R-A. It was like the main original god. But yeah, once again, the code word is Ra. So we hope that you join us next week. again, next Thursday at 3 o'clock, we'll be talking more about Egyptian mythology. And we're going to try to do some sort of craft or something.
Yep. Something hands-on.
Yeah. So we will let you know about that. And we hope you join us and that you enjoyed this week.
All right. See you guys. We hope you enjoyed.
Have a nice week.
See ya.